Hey there, freedom fighters. And this is Travis Stenick. Another day we are reading now Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill. And we just got through the notes to reader and the forward yesterday. And today's Saturday, January 25th. My first meeting with Andrew Carnegie is in chapter one. Now, one thing I want to comment here, it's really cool what Napoleon Hill has done in Think and Grow Rich. And what we're doing in this book is he's literally having conversations with entities that aren't in person, aren't really there physically. So in his mind, he's going into having a round table of mentors with dead people and even existing live people that he doesn't even know, or they're just not in the room. So, what's really interesting is in this first chapter, he's talking about a meeting with Andrew Carnegie, and Andrew Carnegie has since passed away when he writes these books. It was like in early 1900s that he started working for Andrew Carnegie, and in Think and Grow Rich, the other book, he talks about how Andrew Carnegie said basically go research the top successful people of the world and then come back to me. He's like, "Hey, you little schmuck." And he went out for 25 years and talked to 500 people at the time, the most successful of the world, and got to know how they think. And they thought their way into their riches. They, Think and Grow Rich is how the book got its title. And so what's really cool is that he's learned how to think. He's learned how to use his imagination. We've all been given this creative ability to have an imagination, and he's having imaginations with the devil, imaginations with potentially here Andrew Carnegie and others, and he gets insight. His superconscious mind can tap into and get downloads from the infinite and gets all this really cool information and ideas, and we get to listen in to this story that he's going to tell us and learn some stuff. So I'm super excited to dive right in. Chapter one, my first meeting with Andrew Carnegie. For more than a quarter of a century, my major purpose has been that of isolating and organizing a philosophy of achievement, the causes of both failure and success, with the object of being helpful to others who've neither the inclination nor the opportunity to engage in this form of research. My labor began in 1908 as a result of an interview that I had with the late Andrew Carnegie. I frankly told Mr. Carnegie that I wished to enter law school and that I conceived the idea of paying my way through school by interviewing successful men and women, finding out how they came to their success, and writing stories of my discoveries for magazines. At the end of our first meeting with Mr. Carnegie, he asked whether or not I possessed enough courage to carry out a suggestion he wished to offer me. Now, this was crazy. He literally pulled it out and was like, dude, you've got 30 seconds to decide, something like that. He'll probably just tell us here in a minute. I replied that courage was about all I did have and that I was prepared to do my best to carry out any suggestion that he had cared to offer. He then said, your idea of writing stories about men and women who are successful is commendable as far as that goes, but I've got no intention of trying to discourage you from carrying out your purpose. I mean, I got to tell you, if you wish to be some kind of enduring service, not only to those now living, but to, posterity as well, you can do it if you'll take the time to organize all the causes of failure as well as all the causes of success. There are millions of people in this world, they haven't even the slightest conception of the causes of success and failure. The schools, the colleges, they teach practically everything except these principles of individual achievement. Listen, they require young men and women to spend 4 to 8 years acquiring abstract knowledge, but they don't teach them what to do with this knowledge after they get it. The world is in need of a practical and understandable philosophy of achievement, organized from this factual knowledge gained from the experience of men and women in the great university of life. In the entire field of philosophy, I find nothing which even remotely resembles the resort of philosophy which I have in mind. We have a few philosophers who are capable of teaching men and women the art of living. It seems to me here that there is an opportunity which should challenge an ambitious young man of our type, of your type, excuse me, but ambition alone is not enough for this task which I have suggested. The one who undertakes it must have courage and tenacity. He's talking to Napoleon Hill, but that's talking to us. Actually, to like follow forth and do what he's saying, well, you'll have success. You have to have courage and tenacity because we're going up our thinking of the past. We're going up against that anytime we decide to change. See, I've heard somebody told me once that if you imagined your current state of being with all the junk and crap and all the good stuff is a cup. And if you're looking to change, you're going to be pouring water inside of this cup, a new change, a new water. So you start filling this cup that's now been empty with its water. All of your shit is going to rise to the top. And what happens is you get closer and closer to having your full cup replaced by this new way of thinking, this water, the shit rises and starts flowing over. They say this for a reason. It's always darkest before the dawn. There's a reason why there's this compare and contrast. There's nothing to really compare it to. If it was always awesome and amazing, like level 10, you'd get kind of numb. You'd be like, well, what does level 10 even mean? But having level 10, even a level 9 to 10 gives you some variation. But having a level 0 rock bottom, you hit rock bottom, and all of a sudden you have this like phoenix rise from the ashes breakthrough. Like this comes out of that resilience, that courage, because you're going to butt up against your old crap and you have to be tenacious. Having tenacity means that you just keep going and get kicked in the face and get back up regardless. I know we've all been kicked in the face. You've been kicked in the face. I've been kicked in the face. I literally been kicked in the face tonight and earlier this week cut my lip from my 3-year-old toddler who smashed his face and jumped and did crazy things onto my lip and my teeth cut it up and I was bleeding and he's like, "Oh my gosh." Like that that tenacity to keep going are the two elements that are required. He's speaking to Napoleon Hill, but I'm speaking to you because it's speaking to me. Is like, yeah, dude, this is kind of impressive what he's recommending here. The job will require at least 20 years of continuous effort, during which the one who undertakes it will have to earn his living from some other source, because this sort of research is never profitable at the outset. And generally, those who've contributed to civilization through work of his nature have had to wait 100 years or so after their own funerals to receive recognition for their labor. Here's a note to readers from Sharon Lecter. This is when she adds her comments in special sections like this. 20 years of labor with no pay and possibly no recognition. How would you respond to this offer? As he discusses below, Hill accepted Carnegie's challenge, and with a letter of introduction from Carnegie, he set about interviewing the giants of that time, including Theodore Roosevelt, Thomas Edison, John D. Rockefeller, Henry Ford, Alexander Graham Bell, King Gillette, the founder of the Gillette Safety Razor Company, and many others. His effort ultimately culminated in the publication of several books, including the 8-volume Law of Success and, of course, Think and Grow Rich. After more than 25 years of research, Think and Grow Rich is widely recognized as a seminal work in self development, introducing essentially all the principles that continue to serve as a foundation for the teachings of the personal development gurus of today. It's so true. It's literally a non secular Bible. It's not a religious book, but if you're going to say, if the Bible is teaching us about who we are and what we are as ourselves and like this whole life experience, this is religious. This is the non secular Bible. In my opinion, Think and Grow Rich has been my Bible. That's how I introduced it to my, at the time, first mentor I've ever had. Um, and introducing essentially all the principles that continue to serve as the foundation for the teachings of the personal development gurus of today. As reflected in Hill's own description, the process of developing and publishing Think and Grow Rich was itself a study in the principles he revealed. It may be telling that the manuscript of Outwitting the Devil was written the year after Think and Grow Rich was published. Since his work may reveal the frustration and revelation of Hill's other self, his demon side, we always have that little demon sitting on our shoulder, this other self, and how he conquered his frustrations and succeeded in using the very principles that he described in Think and Grow Rich. He was eating his own cooking. He was practicing his own lessons. In Outwitting the Devil, this will reveal Hill's spiritual awakening and how each of us can learn from this encounter with the devil. Ooh, this is going to be a good one. If you undertake this job, you should interview not only the few who have succeeded, but the men who have failed. You should carefully analyze many thousands of people who've been classed as failures. I mean, by the term failures, men and women who come to the closing chapter of life, they're disappointed because they don't attain the goal with which they set their hearts upon achieving. As inconsistent as it may seem, you'll learn more than how to succeed from the failures than you will from the so called successes. They will teach you what not to do. It's so true. A winning team rarely learns a lot on the field as they're managing to stay ahead and prepare and get edged out, but when they actually take their first loss from undefeated, they come back stronger than ever because they went back and learned from their mistakes, from their failures. They learned this will teach you what not to do. Along toward the end of your labor, it will carry it through successfully. If you make a discovery which may be a great surprise to you, you'll discover that the cause of success is not something separate and apart from the man. That is, to force so intangible in nature that the majority of men never recognize it. A force which might be properly called the other self. Noteworthy is the fact that this other self seldom exerts its influence or makes itself known, excepting at times of unusual emergency. And when men are forced through adversity and temporary defeat to change their habits and to think their way out of difficulty. Like when you're thinking creatively and you're in this fight or flight moment, you might instantaneously snap into an other self. My experience has taught me that a man is never quite so near success as that which he calls failure has overtaken him. For it's on occasions of this sort that he's forced to think. If he thinks accurately with persistence, he discovers that so called failure usually is nothing more than a signal to rearm himself with a new plan or a purpose. Most real failures are due to limitations which men set up in their own minds. If they had the courage to go one step further, they would discover their error. Here's another Sharon Lecter. Most real failures are due to limitations which men set up in their own minds. A negative mindset and self doubt, it can be the primary obstacles to success. With the current economic downturn, far too many people who have all their lives done everything right are now, for the first time, ever facing economic adversity. The greatest barrier to their recovery is their own fear and self doubt, instilled by their recent experience. Have you allowed the current economic downturn to overtake you? Have self doubt and self sabotage held you back from reaching your dreams? Are you your own worst enemy? In Think and Grow Rich, Hill told the story of R.U. Darby, a gold prospector, frustrated when a rich vein of gold apparently ran out. Darby, he sold his claim for a pittance to the town junkman. Listen to this. The junkman bought in the right expert advisors, and he found that Darby would have rediscovered the vein had he just moved his digging by a mere 3 feet. Had Darby persevered, he would have made his fortune, but he gave up. He abandoned his dreams. And when he was only 3 feet from gold, rather than being crushed by his error, Darby learned from his experience and went on to build an insurance empire. Will you abandon your quest just before reaching great success? Or when you're only 3 feet from gold? You can read how many of today's icons persevered through difficult situations in the book, 3 Feet from Gold. Begin life anew. Mr. Carnegie's speech, it reshaped my entire life and it planted my mind in a burning purpose, which has driven me ceaselessly. And this despite the fact that I had a vague idea as to what he meant by the term other self. During my labor of research into the causes of failure and success, I've had the privilege of analyzing more than 25,000 men and women who are rated as failures and over 500 who were classed as successful. So think about that for a minute. 500 of the world's best successes, including that top 10, top 25 that you're like, holy shizballs, Batmans, that guy is amazing or that gal's incredible. 25,000 failures. 25,000 more times. That's that's 5 times as much. No, it's not. Well, that's 550 times as much. If I can do maths, what is 50 times as many people as he interviewed? Took him 25 years. That's incredible, dude. Many years ago, I caught my first glimpse of that other self. Mr. Carnegie mentioned the discovery came as he said it would, as the result of two major turning points in my life, which constituted emergencies that forced me to think my way out of difficulties such I'd never before experienced. Now, I wish it were possible to describe this discovery without the use of the personal pronoun, but this impossible, but it but this is impossible because it came through personal experiences from which it was separated. It can't be separated. To give you the complete picture, I shall have to go back to the first of these two major turning points and bring you up to the discovery step by step. The research necessary for the accumulation of the data from which the 17 principles of achievement and the 30 major causes of failure were organized required years of labor. I had reached the false conclusion that my task of organizing a complete philosophy of personal achievement had been completed. Far from having been completed, my work had merely begun. I erected the skeleton of a philosophy by organizing the 17 principles of achievement and the 30 major causes of failure. But that skeleton had to be covered with the flesh of application and experience. Moreover, it had to be given a soul through which it might inspire men and women to meet obstacles without going down under them. This soul, which had yet to be added, as I discovered later, became available only after my other self made its appearance through two major turning points in my life. Resolving to turn my attention and whatever talents I might possess into monetary returns through business and professional channels, I decided to go into the profession of advertising, and I became the advertising manager of LaSalle Extension, University of Chicago. Everything went along beautifully for 1 year, at the end of which I was seized by a violent dislike for my job and I resigned. I then entered the chain store business with the former president of LaSalle Extension University and became the president of the Betsy Ross Candy Company. Unfortunately, or what seemed to me at the time to be unfortunate, disagreements with business associates disengaged me from that undertaking. The lure of advertising still was in my blood, and I tried again to give expression to it by organizing a school of advertising and salesmanship. It was a part of Bryant and Stratton Business College. The enterprise was sailing smoothly, and we were making money rapidly when the United States entered World War I. In response to an inner urge which no words can describe, I walked away from the school and entered the service of the United States government under President Woodrow Wilson's personal direction, leaving a perfectly sound business to disintegrate. On Armistice Day 1918, which is my birthday, Veterans Day, November 11th, it marked the 11th day, the 11th month, the 11th hour that the World War I was ended in treaty with Armistice Day 1918. I began the publication of the Golden Rule magazine. Despite the fact that I didn't have a penny of capital, the magazine grew rapidly and soon gained a nationwide circulation of nearly 500,000, ending its first year's business with a profit of 3,156. And here we have some commentary. For a proper perspective, $3,156 in 1918 would represent $45,000 in 2011, based on the Consumer Price Index average for each year compiled by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, and $202,000 using the nominal GDP per capita tables. So, between 45 and 200 grand. Not a bad profit for a first year in the magazine business. When 80 to 90% of new titles fail, and even the successful ones, they take 3 to 5 years to become profitable. That's according to magazinepublisher.com/startup.html. Some years later, I learned from an experienced publisher that no man experienced in the publication and distribution of national magazines would ever think of starting such a magazine with less than $500,000 of capital. The Golden Rule magazine and we were destined to part company. The more we succeeded, the more discontented I became. And finally, due to an accumulation of petty annoyances caused by business associates, I made them present, I made them a present of the magazine and stepped out. Through that move, perhaps, I tossed a small fortune over my shoulder. Some more commentary. This was only the beginning of Hill's love for magazines. The Golden Rule was followed by his publication of the Napoleon Hill magazine. Later in his life, he became the editor of Success, a magazine that is actually still published today in 2011. Next, I organized a training school for salesmen. My first assignment was to train a sales army of 3,000 people for a chain store company, for which I received $10 for each salesman who went through my classes. Within 6 months, my work had netted me a little over $30,000. Dang. 3,000 people. Success, as far as money was concerned, was crowning my efforts with abundance. Again, I became fidgety inside and I wasn't happy. It became more obvious every day that no amount of money would ever make me happy. So hold on a second. A minute ago, we were thinking $3,000 was around 200K. Now he's got $30,000. That's 2 million. So $2 million back then, man. Without the slightest reasonable excuse for my actions, I stepped out and I gave up a business from which I might easily have earned a healthy salary. My friends and business associates thought I was crazy, and they weren't backward about saying so. Frankly, I wasn't inclined to agree with them, but there seemed to be nothing I could do about it. I was seeking happiness and I hadn't found it. At least that's the only explanation I could offer my unusual actions. I mean, what man really knows himself? Some more commentary. Again, I became fidgety inside. I was not happy. It became more obvious every day that no amount of money would ever make me happy. And I could have written this about myself a few years ago. But when I took action by leaving a situation that, although financially rewarding, was no longer aligned with my personal mission, new doors of opportunity opened for me. It turned out to be the best decision of my professional life. Can you think of a time in your life when you made a difficult decision, but knew it was the right one even when others questioned you? I mean, if you're listening to this and you've listened to anything else I've ever discussed, yes, I am the corporate escape artist that on my birthday, I quit my job by having a limousine come pick me up and a videographer film the whole thing. And I stepped out on my own, not having any income. All of my clients, the last one fired me on August 31st, 2024. I let the 30 customers that I had garnered over the time period that I put together the dental marketing agency, and I slowly let them churn. I actually had more than that, I mean, just keeping things super simple for my brain. I call it 30, went down to zero, and I wasn't making income. It was, what I knew was right, even when others may have questioned me. Even my spouse has questioned me rightfully. I put her in a very tight spot. I only had 3 months. It's been a little bit more, but about 3 months of income set aside, just cash. And then, of course, I have lots of available funds to me. But yes, that was crazy. And what did I do? These opportunities, the doors, the best decision in my professional life, definitely. But new doors of opportunity open for me. I'm just reading what she wrote out here and I'm echoing it. On September of 2024, I just birthed this brand of the corporate escape artist, and crazy things have happened since. Opportunities. It's only January 25th of 2025, and new opportunities have presented themselves this week. I have two new business partners, and one I'm fulfilling and one I'm selling, and it's super exciting and super fun. And I would have never expected this to have happened. Like experienced legendary business owners that burned their businesses to the ground a few months ago and were like, "Yeah, I'm going to start something new." And I'm like, "I did the exact same thing." And the I kind of did it with a magnus opus where I had an 18-year career that I walked away from. These dudes had already quit their jobs long time ago. But, you know, this is kind of a synchronicity that just starts to line up. And I have a bunch of other things cooking as well, a lot of sticks in the fire. But these are the ones that are rising to the top. And I'm just moving. I'm like taking steps. It's amazing. I have so many people I'm working with, and I love helping them all. And how their timings just work out perfectly for me. And others are like, "Hey, I got to take a pause for a couple months. I'll come back." Perfect. Because honestly, I would be spreading myself thin if I was to have to divert all my energy to focusing on coaching clients as well as building these business as a builder. as a fulfiller, as a seller. Like there's a lot of hats I'm wearing. I'm like, got to simplify it down to just the one thing. And so I am still pursuing my brand and my business, and I have to put it on a wait list. I really can't take any more one-on-one coaching clients like I have been, but I'm building a leveraged offer, a scalable offer that I can onboard 30 and 100 people and still have that personal touch. But I don't know when I will pivot over there, and I don't know if, I'm prepared to build this whole team to support that dream and vision. But definitely, there have been new opportunities and new doors opening for me because I took this chance decision. So, what about you? Like, I know that you've had this happen to you before yet, and if it hasn't, it's right around the corner. She's asking us, but knew it was right when even no one or others questioned you. But can you think of a time in your life when you made a difficult decision? So there was mine. Let's head on up. That was during the late fall of 1923. I found myself stranded in Columbus, Ohio, without funds and worse still, without a plan by which to work my way out of my difficulty. It was the first time in my life that I had actually been stranded because of a lack of funds. Many times previously, I found money to be rather shy, but never before I had failed to get what I needed for my personal conveniences. This experience stunned me. I seemed totally at sea as to what I could or should do. I thought of a dozen plans of which I might solve my problem, but I dismissed them all together as being either impractical or impossible for achievement. I felt like someone who'd lost in a jungle without a compass. Every attempt I made to work my way out brought me back to the original starting point. For nearly 2 months, I suffered the worst of all human ailments, indecision. I knew the 17 principles of personal achievement, but what I didn't know was how to apply them. Without knowing it, I was facing one of those emergencies of life through which Mr. Carnegie told me men sometimes discover their other selves. My distress was so great that it never occurred to me to sit down and analyze it, its cause, and seek its cure. Here's some more commentary. The quote, the worst of all human ailments, indecision. Have you ever felt paralyzed by indecision? This was the first major turning point in Napoleon Hill's life. His moving from job to job, seeking contentment and his own ideal professional life sounds like many people today. People who are seeking contentment in their jobs and lives. Hill's predicament was, by his own admission, self inflicted. However, he found himself in very much the same circumstances as someone today who's been negatively affected by the present economic situation. Hill took advantage of his temporary defeat, using it as a spur to force himself into thought and analysis or to find his other self. If you've been dealt a blow by economic circumstances, you too can use it as a lever and motivation to find your other self. I know I sure did. Defeat is converted into victory. One afternoon, I reached a decision through which I found the way out of my difficulty. I had a feeling that I wanted to get out of the open spaces of the country where I could get a breath of fresh air and think. I began to walk, and I'd even gone 7 or 8 miles when I felt myself brought suddenly to a standstill. For several minutes, I stood there as if I'd been glued to my tracks. Everything around me went dark. I could hear the loud sound of some form of energy which was vibrating at a very high rate. Then my nerves became quiet, my muscles relaxed, and a great calmness came over me. The atmosphere began to clear as it did so. I received a command from within which came in form of a thought as near as I can describe it. The command was so clear and distinct that I couldn't misunderstand it. In substance, it said, the time has come for you to complete the philosophy of achievement which you began at Carnegie's suggestion. Go back home at once and begin transferring the data that you've gathered from your own mind to written manuscripts. My other self had awakened. For a few minutes, I was frightened. The experience was unlike I'd ever undergone before. I turned and walked rapidly until I reached home. As I approached the house, I saw my three little boys looking out of a window at our house at our neighbor's children. They were all dressing a Christmas tree in the house next door. Then I recalled that it was Christmas Eve. What, he like totally spaced that it was Christmas Eve? Jeez. Moreover, I recalled with the feeling of deep distress, such as I'd never known before, that there would be no Christmas tree at our house. The look of disappointment on the faces of my children reminded me painfully of that fact. I went into the house. I sat down at my typewriter and I began at once to reduce to writing the discoveries I'd made concerning the causes of success and failure. As I placed the first sheet of paper in the typewriter, I was interrupted by that same strange feeling which had come over me out in the country a few hours before, and this thought flashed into my mind. Your mission in life is to complete the world's first philosophy of individual achievement. You've been trying in vain to escape your task, each effort having brought you failure. See, you are seeking happiness, but learn this lesson once and forever. You are seeking happiness. And learn this that you will find happiness only by helping others to find it. Wow. I think it was Zig Ziglar that says, like, get what you want by helping other people get what they want first. And then a few years from now, hold on a second. Let me rewind the clock back. You've been a stubborn student. You had to be cured of your stubbornness through disappointment. Within a few years from now, the whole world will start through an experience which will place millions of people in need of the philosophy which you've been directed to complete. Your big opportunity to find happiness by rendering useful service will have come. Go to work and do not stop until until you've completed and published the manuscripts which you've begun. Dude, that's crazy. So he like was broke as a joke, nothing to his name. He started and failed a whole bunch of endeavors, and he sat down, busted out his typewriter, started writing on his experiences of success and failure, and then all of a sudden he tapped in to his super conscious mind and got a download. And he's like, dude, this thought flashed into his mind. It was a mission call. Your mission in life is to complete the world's first philosophy of individual achievement. Whoa, dude, that is huge. That's big. And it's like, yeah, you've got 25 years, 500 people that successfully accomplished things, some of the best people in history known to man, alive at the time, dead now, and still legendary 100 years later, and 5 times, 50 times as many, 25,000 failures of everyday Joes had to be. That's the only way you're going to round up 25,000 people, and probably some successful people who he deemed as failure. That's insane. So to have that download, he was conscious of having arrived at last at the end of life's rainbow, and I was happy. So, dude, this happened to me when I was 34 years old, 7 years ago, and I was prospected about doing a network marketing thing. And I was asked, what is your dream? I had the same download. So, my whole life, I've been chasing for money, been trying to accomplish more, been trying to climb a corporate ladder in the job that I was in. And this was about 10 years into the job, 10, 11 years into the job, if I was 33 or 34. So, you know, around that time, I felt like enough was never enough. Like I didn't know like what number of money would ever be enough. And I chased after money because I was quite poor. 18 homes in 18 years and 6 marriages between my 2 parents. There's a lot of instability. And I didn't really grow up with tons of money. My family had money. We have some family that are doing um, you know, car stuff around town and, some real estate stuff around town. I always looked like, oh man, my family has money. I did not have the money. And it's me who always was chasing to replacing the thing that I didn't have. And my kids, when I finally procreated, were like, dude, I don't care about that stuff. Like, you're never around. You know? I kind of grew up same, like, not having parents around, but they were also chasing for paychecks as well. But now I'm chasing for a bigger paycheck. I had enough. I was abundant. I was making 6 figures by the time I was 30. I was really happy at that time to have that goal. Now that's not such a big deal. 2025, it's like you gotta be making 3 or 4 figures or hundreds of thousands, not 3 or 4 figures, 6 figures in the 3 or 4 hundreds of thousands rather than just like barely over 100. But the goals were there in place and I accomplished them. That was great. But when I had this like download from up above, which came to me in the form of like, yeah, dude, you'll be a direct or indirect part of 30% of world freedom, financial freedom. I saw like a globe and 30%. That was trippy to me at first. And I shut it out for many, many years. And it's just gotten stronger and stronger. In September of last year, 2024, I was 40 years old. It took me 4 decades on this earth to walk around. And the last better half of a decade seeking for answers of like, what does this mean? What is this looking like? Been chasing up until 33, 34 years old, like trying to replace the thing that I didn't have. And it was the wrong goal when it was like outward, when it was like the whole entire world. It was one of those people call them God goals. The God vision is so massive that only God could really pull this thing off. I could never do this on my own, ever. I couldn't even do it with everyone that I know. Like to pull that kind of a feat off in my lifetime alone, let alone maybe who knows when it would happen, if ever. It's very utopian society kind of a goal. I understand that. I'm not like stupid and illusory and realizing like, oh man, I'm living in la la land. But I'll tell you what, that's my mission and passion. Like that's the only reason why I'm doing what I'm doing. Everything. Like, imagine the things that happened to me. Hey, daddy, while you working at nights, I was working 60, 80 hours a week, getting paid for 40, chasing a paycheck, trading my life away for what I didn't realize was the most precious thing in the world, which is time. But now I'm doing this to hear those messages of like, yeah, dude, my kids are like, hey, daddy, you're around now. This is so cool. I'm glad that like you finally have time to be around with me. Isn't that interesting? Their 6-year-olds are like, "Hey, dude, I'm noticing you home now." The 4-year-old daughters that tugged on my shoulder, now they've got some other family members being tugged on and be like, "I'm so glad you're home." And then, like my son, Emmett, the 3-year-old boy, who's been born into a world where his dad's been home the entire time. My first 2 kids didn't experience that. They were 5.5 and 8 years old when Mr. COVID baby surprise came. They were fertility treatment babies, and all the fertility treatments failed, and we just gave up. And then a year later, my daughter is like praying in our church, God, let our family be the family with the next baby. And boom, I'm sitting in my pastor's office, like complaining, like, how could this be? I have this thing on my heart. I'm so grateful having 2 kids, but why would God put this on my heart if I wasn't meant to have another kid? And all of a sudden, my wife was pregnant at the time, and I just didn't know it. And so those things happened and I finally got happy. I'd been chasing something my whole life, and all of a sudden, this God goal was put in me, and I was finally happy. I felt like, dude, if I could accomplish that goal, I would finally feel like at peace. Like, whoa. So I don't know if you've ever felt that way in your life, but I felt like exactly as Napoleon Hill describes here, chasing his whole entire life for money, for success, for happiness, and never being happy. And then all of a sudden he gets to work and writes his magnus opus, like his download flash a thought flashed into his mind that your mission in life is to complete the world's first philosophy of individual achievement. He got a download, like I got the download. Your mission in life is to be a direct or indirect part of 30% of world freedom. Why? Like down the road, I've connected some other dots that were planted in my head. Well, why? For resource-based economy, for why? To expand humanity across the cosmos. Like I know many of you listening have always fascinated yourself with the stars, and guys like Elon Musk, Richard Branson, um, Jeff Bezos, there's others like them. Those are the big needle movers that have the most resources right now. If 30% of world financial freedom were to be accomplished and people weren't living in poverty in their minds, not in their pocketbooks, but their minds flourish and their pocketbooks flourish, there would be enough people of like minded people, 1 in 2 people. 50% of Earth were like, yeah, I'm all for this. And 30% actually achieve it. Think about all people on Earth. You're either an Android or an Apple. So there's already a business that's out there that has divided the entire planet by its decision of I'm either A or B. I'm vanilla or chocolate. I'm not swirl. I'm Apple or Android. That's it. Like it's the same thing for world financial freedom. I don't know if it happens in my lifetime, but it finally helped me make happy and finally made me feel like, oh, I've got a happy pursuit. This here, this, as he's saying, it was a thought that flashed into his mind, a mission call in his life. It was for other people. You really think it was meant for like Napoleon Hill to write the world's first philosophy of individual achievement and just keep it on the shelf and die? Like, I know that this one was on the shelf and died. I get it. But Think and Grow Rich is that. exact document that is the world's first philosophy of individual achievement. It's describing the 13 or 16 like success principles that he writes in here. And he created an entire magazine called Success over the document that he wrote there. It wasn't for him, it's for other people. I've talked about this before. Your gifts, the 5 gifts in Strengths Finder, Clifton's Strengths Finder 2.0 of 39 or 34 different, talents and strengths. Like if you read a Bible and you see a guy described here and Jesus had all 34 of those strengths and we have 5 of them typically, and those are your natural gifts and your strengths. And when you operate in those strengths, they're not for you, they're for other people. Michael Jordan's gifts and his hard work and consistency and ethics and work ethic allowed us to observe his gift to the world and decades later. And they're making documentaries and there's video games and there's all sorts of apparel and everything in legacy and memory for his gifts to the world. Your gifts were not meant for you. If you bury them in the ground and you stick them on a shelf, no one will know about them. They wouldn't become the world's first philosophy. But he introduced them to the world and they became his individual life, his life's achievement for documenting humans' individual achievement through their ability to change the way they think and have success or failure. That was it. That's the common principles that he was called to. And if you've had a divine download and it's changed your life or trajectory or a God vision, so to speak, I'm not saying you believe in God, yes or no. That's not the debate here. It is about, do you feel that you've had a thought that came to your mind that changed you? And if you haven't, you're listening to my voice right now, and like minded people attract. And you are right around the corner for having your major breakthrough if you're open to receiving it. You could ask for it and have a download come to you, just meditative state, and give it over. Give it over to God, to the universe, and whatever. Go to sleep and just expect it to arrive. Expect the answer to arrive in the middle of your sleep. When you wake up in the morning, it will come to you at some date and time. You just let go of the date and time and the results, but put it out there at the request and play the movie theater of your mind before bed and seeing the results play out the way you want them to. And then imagine taking that film and just like giving it over, handing it over to whatever, the universe, to God, to your higher self, to just like throw it out there in space and go to sleep and then wake up and then receive that back. Receive that image, play it over in your mind, do it and just let it go. Something may come to you. So, with that side tangent, let's jump back in. Doubt makes its appearance. The spell that the experience may be so called passed away. I began to write. Shortly thereafter, my reason suggested to me that I was embarking upon a fool's mission. The idea of a man who is down and almost out, presuming to write a philosophy of personal achievement, seemed so ludicrous that I laughed hilariously upon, perhaps scornfully. I squirmed in my chair, ran my fingers through my hair, and I tried to create an alibi that would justify me in my own mind by taking the sheet of paper out of my typewriter before I'd actually begun to write. But the urge to continue was stronger than the desire to quit. I became reconciled to my task and then I went ahead. Commentary. The urge to continue was stronger than the desire to quit. Remember that time when you wanted to quit, but something drove you to keep going? It may have been your other self. Whew, that's big. Looking backward now, in the light of all that's happened, I can see that these minor experiences of adversity through which I'd passed were among the most fortunate and profitable of all my experiences. They were blessings in disguise because they forced me to continue a work which finally brought me an opportunity to make myself more useful to the world that I might have been had I succeeded in my previous plan or purpose. For almost 3 months, I worked on those manuscripts, completing them during the early part of 1924. As soon as they'd been completed, I felt myself again being lured by the desire to get back into the great American game of business. Succumbing to this lure, I purchased the Metropolitan Business College in Cleveland, Ohio, and I began to lay plans for increasing its capacity. By the end of 1924, we developed and expanded by adding new courses until we were doing a business nearly double the best previous record the school had ever known. Again, the germ of discontentment began to make itself felt in my blood. Again, I knew that I couldn't find happiness in that sort of endeavor, so I turned the business over to my associates and I went on the lecture platform, lecturing on the philosophy of achievement to the organization of which I devoted so many of my previous years. One night I was booked to lecture in Canton, Ohio, fate, or wherever. It seems sometimes to shape the destiny of men, no matter how hard they may try to battle against it, again stepped into the picture and brought me face to face with a painful experience. In my Canton audience sat Don R. Mellett, a publisher of the Canton Daily News. Mr. Mellett became so thoroughly interested in the philosophy of individual achievement on which I lectured that night, and that he invited me to come see him the following day. That visit resulted in a partnership agreement which was to have taken place on the first of the following January when Mr. Millett planned to resign as publisher of the Daily News to take charge of the business and publishing of the philosophy on which I had been working. However, in July 1926, Mr. Millett was murdered by Pat McDermott, an underworld character and a Canton, Ohio policeman, both of whom were sentenced to life imprisonment. He was murdered because he was exposing in his newspaper a hookup between the bootleggers and certain members of the Canton police force. The crime was one of the most shocking that the Prohibition era ended. Commentary: the July 1926 murder of crusading journalist Donald Ring Mellett, the editor of the Canton, Ohio Daily News, was one of the most publicized crimes in the whole 1920s. 1925, Mellett discovered widespread corruption within the Canton police force and embarked on an anti vice, anti corruption editorial campaign, targeting, among others, the Canton police chief himself. Hill was reported to have asked Ohio's governor to initiate an investigation on the corruption, a detail not reflected in Hill's account. Local underworld figures and at least one Canton police officer hired Patrick McDermott, an ex con from Pennsylvania, to silence Millett. Millett was gunned down outside his home, and as the story goes, the gunmen were also lying in wait for Hill, but a fortuitous automotive breakdown kept him out of their way. That's interesting. Just imagine if his car didn't get jacked up. We would have never actually read the stories of Think and Grow Rich that came out in 1937. On July 17th, the New York Times reported in an article titled More Death Threats Following the Slaying of Canton Editor. The citizens of Canton are terror stricken by threats of further killings by the rulers of the gamblers, bootleggers, and other criminals. As recounted by Hill, after hearing of Mellett's murder and receiving an anonymous warning to get out of town, he actually fled to West Virginia, in large part due to the work of a private detective hired by the Stark County prosecutor. McDermott, two local gangsters, and a former police detective were ultimately convicted of Mellett's murder. Chance? Question mark, saves my life. The moment after Mr. Millett's death, I was called on the telephone and put on notice by some unknown person that I had 1 hour in which to get out of Canton, that I could go voluntarily within the hour, but if I waited longer, I probably would go in a pine box. He'd be wearing the cement boots and swimming with the fishes, is what he was saying. My business association with Mr. Millett had apparently been misunderstood. His murderers eventually believed I was directly connected with the expose that he was making in his newspapers. I didn't wait for the 1 hour time limit to expire. I boogied, he's saying, but immediately he got into my automobile and drove down into the home of the relatives in the mountains of West Virginia, where there's where I remained until the murderers had been placed in jail. That experience came well within the category described by Mr. Carnegie as an emergency that forces men to think. For the first time in my life, I knew the pain of constant fear. My experience of a few years before in Columbus had filled my mind with doubt and temporary indecision, but this one had filled it with the fear that I seemed unable to remove. During the time that I was in hiding, I seldom left the house at night, and when I did step out, I kept my hand on an automatic pistol in my coat pocket, and I had the safety catch unlatched for immediate action. If a strange automobile stopped in front of the house where I was hiding, I went into the basement and carefully scrutinized its occupants through the basement windows. I've some months of this sort of experience, my nerves began to crack. My courage had completely left me, and the ambition, which had hardened me, it had heartened me, my ambition had heartened me during the long years of labor in my search for the causes of failure and success. Well, they'd also departed. Slowly, step by step, I felt myself slipping into a state of lethargy from which I was afraid I should never be able to emerge. The feeling must have been closely akin to that experienced by one who suddenly steps into quicksand and realizes that every effort to extricate himself carries him just so much deeper. Fear is a self generating morass. If the seed of insanity has been in my makeup, surely it would have germinated during these months of living death. Foolish indecision, irresolute dreams, doubt, and fear were my mind's concern day and night. The emergency I faced was disastrous in two ways. First, the very nature of it kept me in a constant state of indecision and fear. Secondly, its forced concealment kept me in an idleness with its attendant's heaviness of time which I naturally devoted to worry. My reasoning faculty had almost been paralyzed. I realized that I had to work myself out of this state of mind. But how? The resourcefulness, which had helped me to meet all previous emergencies, they seemed to have completely taken wing, leaving me helpless. Out of my difficulties, which were burdensome enough for up to this point, they grew another, which seemed more painful than all the others combined. It was a realization that I'd spent the better portion of my past years in chasing a rainbow, searching higher than yon, and the cases of hither and yon for the cases of success, and finding myself now more helpless than any of the 25,000 people whom I had judged as being failures. This thought was almost maddening. Moreover, it was extremely humiliating because I'd been lecturing all over the country in schools and colleges and before business organizations, presuming to tell other people how to apply the 17 principles of success. While here I was, unable to apply them myself, I was sure that I would never again face the world with a feeling of confidence. Every time I looked at myself in a mirror, I noticed an expression of self contempt on my face, and not infrequently. I did say things to the man in the mirror which are not printable. I begun to place myself in the category of charlatans who offer others a remedy for failure which they themselves cannot successfully apply. The criminals who had murdered Mr. Mellett had been tried and sent to the penitentiary for life. Therefore, it was perfectly safe as far as they were concerned for me to come out of hiding and again take up my work. I couldn't come out, however, because I faced circumstances more frightful than the criminals who had sent me into hiding. The experience had destroyed whatever initiative I'd possessed. I felt myself in the clutches of some depressing influence which seemed like a nightmare. I was alive. I could move around, but I couldn't think of a single move by which I might continue to seek the goal which I had at Mr. Carnegie's suggestion. Set for myself, I was rapidly becoming indifferent not only toward myself, but whose worse still, I was becoming grouchy and irritable toward those who'd given me shelter during my emergency. I faced the greatest emergency of my life. Unless you've gone through a similar experience, you can't possibly know how I felt. Such experiences cannot be described. To be understood, they must be felt. Here's some commentary. My reasoning faculty had almost been paralyzed, he says. Well, Hill was paralyzed by the first of the fear of physical harm, and then by the shame of having been paralyzed by that fear. Have you ever been paralyzed by similar emotions? When you're faced with your own emergency, fear can either motivate you or it can paralyze you, the fight or flight mechanism. By recognizing that you have a choice and reacting positively to your fears, you can permanently change your life for the better. Many people today, they may be experiencing the same feelings of anger followed by irritability and debilitating feeling of indifference. They feel discouraged and lack self confidence due to uncertainty in their financial situation or personal lives. They may be angry and allow that anger to paralyze them. I had a conversation with just such a young man. I'm 30 years old, he said, and I have no remarkable skills or marketable skills or prospects. He had a million excuses for not taking action to change his situation. I pointed out that unless he took action, nothing would change. Unless you make an effort to change things, I said, in a year's time, the only difference will be that you are 31 years old and no marketable skills or prospects. Does this pattern sound familiar to you, either for yourself or someone that you care for? I mean, how do you break that paralysis? Napoleon Hill, he now shares how he overcame his fear and indifference and found the hope, inspiration, and motivation to recover and recreate success in his life. The most dramatic moment of my life. The turn came suddenly in the fall of 1927, more than a year after the Canton incident. I left the house one night and I walked up to the public school building on top of a hill above the town. I'd reached a decision to fight the matter out with myself before that night ended. I began to walk around the building, trying to force my befuddled brain to think clearly. I must have made several hundred trips around the building before anything which even remotely resembled organized thought began to take place in my mind. As I walked, I repeated over and over to myself, there's a way out, and I'm going to find it before I go back to the house. I must have repeated that sentence 1,000 times. Moreover, I meant exactly what I was saying. I was thoroughly disgusted with myself, but I entertained a hope of salvation. Then, like a flash of lightning out of the clear sky, an idea burst into my mind with such force that the impulse drove my blood up and down my veins. Whoa! Can you imagine getting a thought so chilling that your blood just courses through your veins? Crazy. This is your testing time. You've been reduced to poverty and humiliated in order that you might be forced to discover your other self. Woo. Commentary. If today's economic times have dealt you a blow, moving you towards poverty, or embarrassing you, or damaging your self confidence, consider it a test, as Napoleon Hill did in the late 1920s and early 1930s. Force yourself to discover your other self by working through the low points in your life. And persevering, you can gain the insight that you need to succeed. For the first time in years, I recalled what Mr. Carnegie had said about his other self. I recalled now that he said that I would discover it toward the end of my labor of my research into the causes of failure and success, and that the discovery usually came as a result of an emergency, when men are forced to change their habits and to think their way out of difficulty. I was forced to change my habits of going to a job every single day, whether it's working from home or driving in for the office of 18 years, day in, day out. My habits were now got to live and eat and make money for myself and for my own, and it almost frightened me until it didn't. Till it's like I'm actually having fun every single day, like I am right now. I'm hitting record and doing something that's fun for me to do. It's a daily committed action that I'm doing for other people, but I'm doing for myself. It's fun. And I'm making money while doing things that are fun. I value stack crappy things with fun things. I like to record myself on video, and I don't necessarily like to set up all these softwares. And so I might as well record myself setting them up. And then other people want to learn how to do it too. And it's like, wow, I should just help more people. I continued to walk around the schoolhouse, but now I was walking on air subconsciously. I seemed to know that I was about to be realized, excuse me, I was about to be released from the self made prison into which I'd cast myself. And I realized this great emergency had brought me an opportunity, not merely to discover my other self, but to test the soundness of the philosophy of achievement, which I'd been teaching others as being workable. Soon I would know whether it would work or not. I made up my mind that if it didn't work, I would burn the manuscripts I'd written and never again be guilted by telling other people that they were the matters of their fate, the captains of their souls. Commentary. Hill is paraphrasing from the poem Invictus, published in 1988 by William Ernest Henley. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I've not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody but unbowed. Beyond the place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged the punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. The full moons was just rising over the mountaintop, and I'd never seen it shine so brightly before. As I stood gazing at it, another thought flashed into my mind. It was this: you've been telling other people how to master fear and how to surmount the difficulties which arise out of the emergencies of life. But from now on, you can speak with authority because you're about to rise above your own difficulties with courage and purpose, resolute and unafraid. With that thought came a change in the chemistry of my being, which lifted me into a state of relaxation and exultation I never before known. My brain began to clear itself of the state of lethargy into which it lapsed. My faculty of reason began to work once more. For a brief moment, I was happy to have the privilege of going through those long moments of torment because the experience provided me an opportunity for me to test the soundness of the principles of achievement which I had so laboriously wrested from my research. When this thought came to me, I stopped still. I drew my feet closely together, saluted. I didn't know what or to whom I was saluting, but I stood there rigidly at attention for several minutes. It seemed at first like a foolish thing to do, but while I was standing there, the thought came to me in the form of an order. That was as brief and snappy as it ever been given by a military commander to a subordinate. And the order said, "Tomorrow, get into your automobile and drive to Philadelphia, where you will receive aid in publishing your philosophy of achievement." There was no further explanation, no modification to the order. Just as soon as I received it, I walked back to the house, went to bed, slept with peace of mind such as I'd not known for over a year. When I awoke the next morning, I got out of bed and I immediately began packing my clothes and made ready for the trip to Philadelphia. My reason told me that I was embarking upon a fool's mission. I didn't know anyone in Philadelphia whom I could apply for a financial aid in publishing 8 volumes of books at a cost of $25,000, I asked myself. Instantly, that answer to the question flashed into my mind as plainly as if it had been uttered in audible words. You were following orders now, instead of asking questions. Your other self will be in charge during this trip. There was another condition which seemed to make my preparation to go to Philadelphia, absurd. I had no money. This thought had barely occurred to me when my other self exploded in by giving another sharp order saying, "Ask your brother in law for $50 and he'll lend it to you." This order seemed definite and final. Without further hesitation, I followed the instructions. When I asked my brother in law for the money, he's like, "Why, certainly you can have $50, but if you're going to be gone very long, then you better take 100." I thanked him and I said I thought $50 would be enough. I knew it was not enough, but that was the amount of money my other self had commanded me to ask for, and that's the amount that I secured. I was greatly relieved when I found that my brother in law wasn't going to ask me why I was going to Philadelphia. If he'd known all along that what had taken place in my mind during the previous night, perhaps he wouldn't have thought that I should go see a perhaps he would have thought that I should go see a psychiatrist hospital for treatment instead of going to Philadelphia on a wild goose chase. My other self takes command. I left with my head telling me that I was a fool, and my other self commanded me to ignore the challenge and carry out my instructions. I drove all night, arriving in Philadelphia the next morning. My first thought was to look up at a modestly priced boarding house where I could rent a room for about $1 a day. Here again, my other self took charge and gave me the commands to register at the most exclusive hotel in the city. With a little more than $40 of my remaining capital in my pocket, it seemed like financial suicide when I marched up to the desk and asked for a room. Or rather, I should say, I started to ask for a room when my newly discovered other self gave the order to ask for a suite of rooms, the cost of which would just about consume my remaining capital in 2 days. I obeyed. I obeyed. I obeyed, and the bellboy picked up my bags, handed me my claim check for my automobile, and bowed me toward the elevator as if I were the Prince of Wales. It was the first time in more than a year that any human being had shown me any such deference. My own relatives, with whom I'd been living, far from have ever shown me that deference, or so I'd imagined. They felt as I was a burden on their hands, and I'm sure that I was, because no man in the frame of mind would have been in for the past year could be anything other than a burden to them with whom he came into contact. It was just becoming apparent that my other self was determined to wean me away from the inferiority complex which I had personally developed by my repetitious way of thinking. He conditioned himself into a way of being that was not who his other self is. It's not who he truly was. He thought himself into another uh, timeline. If you say this is like a multiverse or multiple universes, this timeline was a trajectory that he was not. It was not his pure self. His other self was like, no, we're going to snap you out of this. So he tossed the bellboy a dollar. I started to estimate what my hotel bill would be at the end of the week when my other self snapped me out of it, commanded me to get my mind entirely off all thoughts of limitation, and to conduct myself for the first time in my life, being just as I would be if I had all the money I wanted in my pockets. The experience I was passing through was both new and strange to me, but I'd never posed as being anything other than what I believed myself to be. Be, do, have. He was being that person. Despite his brain running around in circles saying you are not good enough, his other self brain said, yes, you are. Be this way. Do these things. You will have the results. For nearly half an hour, this other self gave orders which I followed to the letter during the subsequent period of my stay in Philadelphia. The instructions were given through the medium of thoughts, which presented themselves in my mind with such force that they were readily distinguishable from my ordinary self created, jumbled up thoughts. The junk that always runs through our head. He could clearly determine the difference. Commentary. Hill took on the persona of the wealthy man that he wanted to be. Do have. We strongly agree that to be wealthy, you need to think wealthy. It's also important to be in the right environment. Don Green, CEO of the Napoleon Hill Foundation, once told me, I first bought my good suits from Sobel's, a custom clothing store where Eastman Kodak executives shopped. The owner had a sign behind the register that said, if you want to be a success, you must first dress the part. However, we recommend moderation in trying to emulate Mr. Hill in spending money that he didn't have. Yeah, unless you've got the skills to pay the bills to back it up, acting this boldly and courageously, unless your higher self, other self, commands you to do it, um, take heed, is all the author's commentary was saying. I received strange orders from a strange source. My instructions began in this fashion. You are now completely in charge of your other self. You are entitled to know that two entities occupy your body, as in fact, two similar entities occupy the body of each living person on earth. One of these entities is motivated by and responds to the impulse of fear. The other is motivated by and responds to the impulse of faith. For more than a year that you've been driven like a slave by the fear entity. Night before last, the faith entity gained over control of your physical body, and you're now motivated by that entity. For the sake of convenience, you may call this faith entity your other self. It knows no limitations and it has no fears, and it recognizes no such word as impossible. You were directed to self this environment of luxury in a good hotel as a means of discouraging the return to power of the fear entity. That fear motivated old self is not dead, it's just merely been dethroned, and it will follow you around wherever you go, awaiting a favorable opportunity to step in and take charge of you again. It can gain control of you only through your thoughts. Remember this and keep the doors of your mind tightly closed against all thoughts which seek to limit you in any manner whatsoever, and you will be safe. Do not permit yourself to worry about the money that you'll need for your immediate expenses. That will come to you by the time that you must have it. Now, let us get down to business. First of all, you should know that the faith entity is now in charge of your body and it performs no miracles, nor does it work in opposition to any of nature's laws. As long as it's in charge of your body, it will guide you when you call on it through impulses of thought, which it will place in your mind in carrying out your plans through the most logical and convenient natural media available. Above everything else, get this fact clearly fixed in your mind that your other self will not do your work for you. It will only guide you intelligently in achieving for yourself the objects of your desires. Will you be guided by faith or will you allow fear to overtake you? Said the commentary. This other self, it will aid you in translating your plans into reality. Moreover, you should know that it begins always with your major or most pronounced desire. At this time, your major desire, the one with which you brought you here, is to publish and distribute the results of your research into the causes of success and failure. Your estimates that you will need approximately $25,000. It's like $1 million. Among your acquaintances, there's a man who will supply you with this needed capital. Begin at once to call into your mind the names of all persons of your acquaintance whom you've reason to believe might be induced to furnish the financial aid that you require. When the name of the logical person comes into your mind, you'll recognize it immediately. So communicate with that person, and the aid that you seek will be given. In your approach, however, present your request in terminology such that you would use this in casual course of business transactions. And make no reference whatsoever to this introduction that you've been had to your other self. If you violate these instructions, you will meet with temporary defeat. It goes on. Your other self will remain in charge and continue to direct you as long as you rely upon it. Keep doubt and fear and worry and all those thoughts of limitation entirely out of your mind. That will be all for the present moment. You'll now begin to move at your own free will, precisely as you did before you discovered your other self. Physically, you're the same as you've always been. Therefore, no one will recognize that any change has taken place in you. Whew. Oh man, I looked around the room. I blinked my eyes and to make sure that I wasn't dreaming. I got up, I walked over to a mirror, I looked at myself closely. What the heck? The expression on my face had changed from one of doubt to one of courage and faith. There was no longer any doubt in my mind that my physical body was in charge of an influence far different from the one which had been dethroned 2 nights before. As I walked around the schoolhouse that night in West Virginia. Commentary. Here, in editing the manuscript, I've ended the chapter at one of the greatest turning points in the author's life. Have you ever undergone a life change such that the one that Hill describes above can also be described in religious terms as a conversion experience? Others may simply refer to it as a wake up call or a tap on the shoulder, or more vehemently, as a slap in the face. And that's all we got for today, the end of chapter 1. A lot of profound moments. I want you to go back and reflect. Until next time.